Hi, welcome to another edition of Writers of Meaning. Today I've got with us Emily, the graphic artist and the actual artist of behind the Writers of Meaning uh, book project. So we're thrilled to have her on. She's coming in live from New York, at least for me, and where I used to be when I was a little one. Um, but what I'd like to do is to copy Paul Van Clay's style and let her tell us a little bit about herself. Um, so maybe you might be kind enough to tell us a little bit about your journey of how you ended up in our corner of the internet and how you uh, found out about the Writers Project.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for
Sure.
inviting me on, by the way.
Oh, yeah, I'd
Um,
love to have you.
yeah, this was such a fun project and part of the internet. So how I discovered the corner. Um, actually, a very good friend of mine and I have been basically doing estuary-like discussion groups for quite a while. So you mentioned that I'm an artist, but this friend is a pianist and composer,
Oh,
and she was for a little while an associate artistic director of a choir here in the city, and so they the women it was a women's choir, and the women in the choir were wanting a way to connect outside of rehearsal time and way to maybe have deeper conversation than they could in their day to day. And
hmm,
so through our friendship, I was spitballing ideas with her. They asked her to be kind of the mediator of any discussion. So the idea behind it was to talk about taboo or difficult topics. So it's a topic-based discussion group style where people would submit either an article or a topic and then present, you know, maybe 2 to 3 takes on the topic to read beforehand. And so I'd help her kind of brainstorm questions or ways to or anticipate ways the discussion might go and how she could move things along, etc. And so after a while, she was like, "You just need to be in the choir so you can come too." So I auditioned and got in, and we were running
oh,
this group for a while. Yeah, it was really fun and would talk about anything from, pornography to burnout to all kinds of topics. And so we really had a good kind of team going, and then COVID hit, and then it just died. So a lot of the women who were really the steamrollers behind it was called Huddle, but the people who were behind it all moved away, and the new group didn't really know about it as much. So it kind of fell apart, and we tried various iterations with other friends and just kept failing. And we were listening to we follow, a ton of, as everybody, we all listen to a bunch of podcasts. And there's a guy in particular in the UK named Glenn Scrivener who
oh,
has an online channel called Speak Life. And on that, he interviewed Tom Holland and Paul Vanderklay. And
oh,
so we watched that interview, and my friend, her name's Rachel, she did a little bit more digging on Paul and found his content about estuary. And she was like, "Oh my gosh, Emily, someone is doing what we want to do. We're not crazy. We're not alone. And they have these Zoom calls. We need to sign up." So, yeah, we joined the LSNet Leader Network and have been doing Zoom calls since then. And through the process, I got to know John Van Donk a little bit more. And when he found out that I'm a graphic designer, and at the time I was working for a publisher, so I was designing books. He was like, "Oh, you design books. Are you interested in designing a book? There's this project happening. How about I send you info about it and you can see if you want to get involved?" So that is what brought me to Writers of Meaning, uh, and kind of dipping my toes into the little corner.
very cool.
Right?
Awesome. I never heard your full story. I heard snippets a little bit,
Yeah.
and just before we went live, I'm like, John Van Donk. Oh my goodness, I had no idea. So that's fantastic. Thank you very much, John Van Donk. If you happen to watch, you probably
Yep.
won't, but that's okay. You're a busy man. Um,
You're the
but
best, John. We love you.
yeah, yeah. Um, so it sounds like the huddle was a very edifying thing. It there's kind of a universal thing to having small group discussion with
Yeah.
deeper meaning and so forth. And we were very pleased that we were able to get that John Van Dock kindly said, "Hey, I have this other piece. Would you want this?" And we're like, "Let's look at it." And it's like, "Oh my god, it's perfect. Yes."
Yeah.
And then so he was the one who pointed me towards the banner, and I got up enough courage to contact them and like, I don't know if this is gonna work, but let's see. And then they said yes to the article being reprinted. So we're like, yay!
Awesome. Yeah.
So that was pretty fun. So John Van Donk's the connector. So that's
He's really good at doing that, I think
he
I've
is.
learned. Yeah.
So what are some of the differences that you found? Is it mostly the same for you for estuary and huddle, or there's some differences, or what do you like some of one or some of the other? What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that? That's an interesting background to
Yeah.
have.
We have found that estuary has just been a model that works, really well because with the Huddle great was the Huddle, group was great. However, on the front end, it required a lot of work and research. So,
Oh,
like, if you're discussing, like, I think one of the discussions was about the Kavanaugh hearings. So, and just that whole phenomenon and the background with that. And so, like, if you think about, okay, there's a lot going on within that story. There's like, someone being grilled to try and figure out if he's going to be appointed to an office, but a lot of, obviously the background of like what happened when he was 17. Is this a person people want as a leader? Does what you do at 17, should that inform who you are as an adult? Like, is it really okay to judge others or ourselves by the worst thing we've ever done.
mm,
So, but these are all very sensitive topics, and so basically, we just felt like there was a lot of homework involved. So even to
ah,
attend the discussion, the hope was that you would read or listen to the content beforehand to then be
ah,
ready to discuss it. And while, of course, we wouldn't be like, "You didn't read it, you can't participate," but what's great about Estuary is there's no prep or homework involved. And
ah,
even for someone facilitating, that's really nice because you don't have to worry about it, like everyone showing up is going to come with a topic or something will come out of it, and you
mm,
don't have to put in this work ahead of time, hoping for something or so this I think the phrase that people associate with estuary a lot is the spirit of the room. um, that definitely happens from time to time where even a group of 8 people who are very, very different will somehow have topics that are all related or theme or something of particular interest arises. So
mm.
it's yeah, as far as the prep work, it's no prep, which is great.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
helpful.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and, I don't and as time has gone on, so our group has been running now for almost a year.
nice.
We can also sense a deeper vulnerability. People are getting to where they are sharing more intimate details about themselves you know, and being okay with that, so that's
Yeah,
really it's really great to see. I mean, I think I've told John this before, but and my friend Rachel, like, something's happening in Estuary. I'm a huge, cheerleader for Estuary, and it feels like we have a front row seat to something that's happening because there's really, really great conversation, both in the meetings themselves, but even afterward, based on who lives near whom. People have train buddies now, or they walk home together, and conversation keeps going. So it's a really great thing.
That's fantastic. I'm so glad.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, there anything else regarding like meaningful conversations? Like, did you notice a lack of it in your life, and you're yearning for it, or did you always like? Did you have a history of growing up with it in your family and friends?
Hmm.
What what is your background regarding like more meaningful? Below the shallow chit chat level.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I only realized fairly recently that this has been something that I've been drawn to for a really long time. So even back in maybe late high school, early college, I had a group of friends who really enjoyed philosophy, and they decided to create their own holiday that they called Sockmas, in between Christmas and New Year's, when most people would be back home if they were away at college or something.
Huh.
And it was all in around Socrates. So they would
Oh,
yeah,
interesting.
they would have a little dinner party, a potluck party where anyone could come. It was whole families would be there. So, like, my friends with their parents, my parents came one year, and we would just sit around, and they had usually a list of thought experiments that we would discuss around a fire. And then at midnight, or at some point in the night, not necessarily midnight, we would have a celebratory poison drinking where they would read the story of Socrates and his final moments. And then we all did a shot of ouzo in Socrates' honor, I guess. So,
Aw.
yeah. But it was great because really from year to year, even people who went away or were home for the holidays, we would all find each other again. So you would be catching up with people, and then having these, philosophical discussions where you could shout out something or bring up a question and then talk. And so I guess I've been kind of doing this kind of thing, this type of exercise for a while, for a long time. Um, and then I guess the next time that I had a lot of really intensive, deep discussion would be during my MFA. So after I got a bachelor's degree in graphic design, and then I did a master's in fine arts in they changed the name halfway through. So I think at the end it was emerging media. It
Ah,
was a fancy way to say interdisciplinary art that had to involve technology in some way. Um,
ah,
yeah.
I see.
So yeah, but it was a full-time 3-year program, and we were in a cohort, and so basically, you're spending at least 4 days a week, 6 hours a day, and intensive theory classes in the studio, talking about ideas, talking about art, talking about your art, talking about your classmates' art, talking with professors. So there was a ton of intense, you know, research, reflection, thinking,
Mhm.
reacting, interpreting. Um, so that definitely was really intensive and exhausting, but also totally my jam, you know?
Oh, that's so cool. That's
Yeah.
I don't know. I have more of a media background. I don't have more of a fine arts or a graphic arts background.
Mhm,
My the closest I've gotten to it is my brother used to do graphic arts work for different clients we had.
mhm.
He was an audio engineer, a video editor, and a graphic artist.
Nice.
And he started in high school. And
Mhm.
I think you started like in high school as well, right?
Right, yeah,
So
so
how did you? So he ended up getting involved in the yearbook, and that was his entryway into
oh,
this
nice.
discovering that he enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Um, but he has vision issues, so it's like he can't really do it as much as he used to do
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
But how did you find for your love of art in high school? That would be a fun story to hear.
Yeah, sure. So I went to a magnet high school. It was an arts magnet school, so there you actually had to audition to get in. I
Oh,
actually had auditioned for theater,
oh,
and then at the last minute, my mom was like, "You really should audition for something else too as a backup, just in case. And of course, at the time, I was like, "Psh, what does my mom know? Nothing." But but I begrudgingly did it, and you had to make a PSA beforehand. You had to write a 1-minute speech. So, I should say I chose communications as my
Oh,
backup
okay.
audition. And, yeah, so I show up to this audition, and I had, like, my printed PSA. I had a 1-minute speech about aliens. I
Aw,
was like, "How weird can I be?"
aw,
And then, we had to do an exercise when we were there, so we had a writing exercise where they handed out all the materials we needed, so paper, pens, and all that, and then face down on every desk was a photograph. And so they said, "Okay, you're going to turn this photograph over, and you have 20 minutes to write a story." So I turned over the photograph, and it was I could still see it. It was, like 3 teenagers, they're teenage girls all standing next to each other, and they're all making, like, really gross faces, like, one of them's like, "Ah," and another it's very dramatic. They're all, like,
ah,
making disgusting faces. So I wrote a story in the first person perspective of one of the girls, um, having going to high school, having a crush. I won't do the whole thing. I'll try to do a quick outline, but yeah. So being in high school, having a crush, and seeing that her crush is auditioning for the school play, the lead role. So she auditions for the love interest, and they both get the roles. And then the director's like, well, to keep it real, we won't practice the kissing scene until opening night. So they don't. And she's like anticipating it because she can't tell him that how she feels. And then when it comes to the play night, the anticipation builds and then the kiss happens and then they're off stage and the girls are like, "Okay, how was it?" And she was like, "It was horrible. He ate something with garlic and had horrible breath." So that was my story. And, when I walked into the communications audition, the judges were there, and they're like, "So, your story," and literally all 4 of them just bust out laughing. Um, and then I don't even know what happened next, and then they're like, "Okay, go ahead, do your speech." So I did the speech, but honestly, I feel like they didn't even listen to it. They were, like, writing, doing other things, and then didn't really pay attention. So honestly, I wonder if the story is what got me into
oh,
communications.
wow.
So I did not get into theater, but I got into communications. Mm,
Ah,
yeah, and so there I took speech and debate starting freshman year of high school, and I took a film class, and then I just loved my art classes. So the way the school was set up because you had a major, so I was a communications major, I had to take a minimum of 2 art area classes, and basically, I loved those more than my other classes, so I
oh,
just did my best to just, like, check off all the minimum high school requirements for subjects and take
ah,
as many art classes as I could, so by the
cool.
time I was a senior, I had 4 art classes, speech and debate, uh, I was on the literary and arts magazine, um group, graphic design, and what was I think film, I did all 4 years. So,
Wow,
graphic design, I was able to start my junior year of high school, and, the teacher that we had was basically like I almost wonder if he wasn't a teacher in residence, or an artist in residence, because he did work as a designer,
mm,
and was teaching us, and so he taught us, um, you know, Illustrator, Photoshop, InDesign, sure the trifecta basic
wow.
programs, which is
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
Yeah. So then when I went to college, I didn't know what major I wanted to do, and on tour, I just toured the visual arts building and learned more about art, and decided to major in art.
cool.
And I guess the thought I had was, graphic design is an applied art kind of so you can find work even if you're an art major, right? You
Right,
don't have to be a starving artist if you
you're right.
do graphic design.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I kind of fluctuated a little in there too. I mean,
I have a couple little questions for
yeah,
you.
Go
when
for
you
it.
s and I it might be I have a hearing loss, so I might have misheard you,
Oh,
but when you were talking about your high school,
mhm.
you said something about magnet. It's a
A
magnet?
magnet school.
So,
Yeah.
like, you mean like magnet?
Yeah, so that's what
Okay.
yeah, that's the word for it. So
I've never
bas
heard of that term for school. What does that
okay.
mean?
Yeah, so in I'm from I grew up in Florida,
Oh,
and yeah, the way the public school system works there is you have, like, zoned schools,
okay.
but a magnet school is a special case where you don't have to live in the surrounding area to go to that school, so they called those
Oh,
magnet schools. I don't know why,
okay.
but that's what
That makes
some of
sense.
them were called, either magnet schools or if they had an IB program, that they had a special name for that, the International Baccalaureate Program.
Oh.
So those schools, if you qualified to get in, then you weren't bound by whatever, school district or county you lived in.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
So, you learned a lot of the software and principles of designing work and a lot of extra so you became more of a multifaceted, um, communication artist, and then you started gravitating towards art because you enjoyed those classes more.
Mhm.
And then, um, is that what you inspired you to go to art school? Or was there other factors that kind of, steered you that way?
Yeah, I mean, I know at least for since the communications classes were primarily, communication based, so speech and debate or the Literary and Arts magazine was kind of a blend of those where I did the layout and design for that. But definitely writing and communicating was very, very important, and those were the skills that were emphasized. But in graphic design, I just loved the programs, I liked the processes, I loved Illustrator the best, that was my favorite. Now I love InDesign the best, but we'll get to why later.
Okay.
But, yeah, so the college that I went to, graphic design was in the art under the art category. So but in order to get to graphic design, you had to take 5 fundamental classes first, and
Oh.
then you had to apply to be in the graphic design program with a portfolio. You had a portfolio review,
Oh.
and then you could get design. So through that process, I actually took like visual art classes, maybe for the first time since like middle school, where you learn the foundations of two-dimensional design, you learn drawing, you learn three-dimensional design. A lot of it was more, I mean, they're definitely designed to weed people out because I went to a state school. It's one of the largest universities in the nation, actually.
Wow.
So I went to the University of Central Florida in Orlando,
Cool.
and, yeah, so in order to not have, how like 5,000 people applying for graphic design, like, all of the art the art, majors were like this, where you had to take these 5 classes, pass them, do a portfolio review, no matter what you ended up declaring as your major, whether it was, ceramics, drawing, painting, or design, or even animation. We all had to go through these foundation classes first.
Wow.
Um, and yeah, it was through that where I mean, I love working with my hands. I later on took like book art classes. I took painting to learn more about color theory. Um, you could take printmaking, there was just so much that you had available there.
Cool.
Um, yeah, so through that process, I ended up focusing on graphic design, but, um, at the end, when it came close to graduation, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, and this university also had a master's program, so I decided to apply for a master's degree. I applied to more than one school, but,
Mhm.
various schools and programs, but what was great about this one was this interdisciplinary, um, approach where you didn't have to focus on a specific medium. So a
Oh,
lot of art schools, it depends, but most of them have a specific focus. So if you're applying to a grad program, you're applying specifically for, painting, printmaking, book arts. I applied to some book arts programs, you know, whatever the focus may be. But then this one, it was just a studio art program, so it was open. Which meant you could do a lot more experimenting and not have to fit in this one box,
That's
which
cool.
is totally
So they let you explore,
right.
and it's like I have a different channel called NAR Fellowship,
Mhm.
and it's basically my learning journey.
Mm,
And one of the things studied for this book, because I'm helping as the public relations for the book. Basically, I'm helping with marketing.
yeah.
Um, so I didn't really know very much about marketing. I never took college classes except for some media classes with my brother,
Mhm.
and uh, so I never went to classical college and marketing programs and all that kind of stuff. I just knew stuff from working in the industry,
Mhm.
and I don't know book marketing specifically. And
Mhm.
so I had to learn some stuff about it. And so, of course, part of what you're supposed to learn about is branding. And
Mm.
and everybody has different opinions on branding. It's like,
Oh, yeah.
"Oh, it's really important," or it's like, "It's stupid," and, all this kind of everything in between. And it's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay, who's right, who's wrong? I have no idea." So you kinda muddle through it. Um, did you I don't know if at the time if branding was just, like, starting to come out while you were in college or what
Yeah,
you
so you're talking about the idea of yourself as a brand, right?
Yeah,
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 that was happening when I was in grad school, and I remember the first time I heard that idea of like, "Oh, but, you have to have your own brand," and I was like, "What are these people talking about? Brands are for, a store or a thing, a service, a business."
yeah,
Um, yeah, I struggled a lot with the notion then. I still think now it's doesn't behoove us to think of ourselves as a brand,
mm,
um, just because that just feels so shallow and
yeah,
limiting, like
yeah,
'cause then you're much more conscious of how you communicate to
mm,
others, so it tied in a lot with my focus during my master's program, so my master's had a thesis component, so throughout we were making artwork and the end culminated in a group show, everyone in the cohort had an exhibition together, a group exhibition, but we also all had to write a thesis and then defend the thesis.
ah,
Um, yeah, so we had a committee and a public defense where anybody could come in and listen and ask questions. So the ideas that I was exploring, I'm really interested in language. Um,
ah,
yeah, I my mom's French, so I grew up bilingual, bicultural. So
oh,
yeah, language has always been of interest to me. And so basically, I was exploring the idea of language as a semiotic system. So, semiotics, as in like you have a sign, a signifier, and that both work together to communicate a signified meaning.
mm,
So, Roland Barthes is a French philosopher who I refer to the most about semiotics, and he talked about it most in the context of advertising, for example, or marketing. But I view the idea of having myself as a brand as a way to control what you communicate to others, and it
mm,
focuses so much more on maybe like the things that you want to signify, like the signifiers you want people
huh,
to associate with you
hmm,
more than, you know, who you actually are.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have some questions, though, two things.
Mhm.
One, I remember, several years ago, I got interested by a recommendation in a gentleman who's since passed away, but he was a psychologist, and his name was Paul Tournier, and
Mm.
he talked about the persona, and he didn't use it the same way as Freud and them did.
Mhm.
Um, he it was more like an avatar of who you are,
Mhm.
and we because people are so multifaceted and much richer and deeper than we can contemplate, and mentally wrap our heads around, um, we usually have avatars in order to deal with each other.
Yeah.
Sister, brother, father, mother, you know, employee, employer, things like
Right.
that. And then, um, and so it kind of like it made me think of brands a little bit after I was learning more about it. And I'm like, that's interesting because it's like you're trying to wear an avatar so people can interact with you, kind of thing, and
Yeah.
understand what to expect from you. It's just when your avatar doesn't align with who you are as a person, then
Mhm.
you have like disjointed stuff, and you have just as the shadow, as Carl Jung talks about,
Right.
where it's like you got to do shadow work. It's not just the deep, dark, bad things about yourself. It's the disjointed ness of your persona and your real self.
Yeah.
And when they're not in alignment, or it's a facade, a
Right.
con man, whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be a con man. It could be you could be lying to yourself and not even realizing it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that made me kind of think of the brand thing in a different light. It's
Right.
like good and bad kind of thing. And we kind of need it to help process who each other are,
Mhm.
but we can get really um, disenfranchised and disconnected from each other if that's all we think someone is.
Right. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think in a sense it ends up dehumanizing
yeah,
ourselves to ourselves in a way. If you're relying on your own self as a brand,
mhm,
then, you know, anything that attacks the brand or anything where anywhere where the brand is not landing, then it's too easy. We do this anyway, but there's a great quote, and I don't remember who said it, but we measure our worth based on the measure of our work. That's like a very
yeah,
human inclination,
yeah,
right? So if you're also building your professional life on yourself as a brand,
mhm,
then if that fails, it would be too easy to associate that failure with who you are too. And, I think having a brand as a distant thing or something, a separate entity from yourself is
mm.
maybe a more wise way to do it. I just
That
wonder too, I was thinking of
yes.
celebrities, like,
Oh, yes, celebrity.
they
Yeah,
must really struggle with this kind of thing as well if they don't
yeah,
have a strong, real, for lack of a better term, but like a real life or people who know the real them as
right,
opposed to the marketed them or the them
right,
that they have to present to the world.
right.
Imagine
So
it's
it's
really
like
hard.
it can be a dimension of your identity, but not the whole of your identity. And
Right,
then if that part of you is attacked, it's not attacking the central identity of who you are as a person.
right.
Yeah. I have another question to kind of do, unless you other thoughts you had
No,
on this
go for
topic.
it. Yeah.
Okay. I would love to explore your background and your mother being French. Were you born in France?
I was not born in France, I was born in the States, but,
Okay.
yeah, so my dad's American, my mom is French, and we grew up so growing up, we went to France every summer. So my mom is a
Cool.
teacher, she still is, and, she basically, in the summers, we would spend time at my grandparents' house, usually about a month every summer, which was really great. So, and
Cool.
it's the way it's worked out is I only have French cousins. I don't have American cousins.
Aw.
So, yeah, so, we would go to France in the summer and all of us cousins kind of grew up together at my grandparents' house. It was a very
Nice.
bucolic setting in the Pyrenees, like super rural. They didn't have internet until I was in high school.
Mm,
It was just a very old way of doing life for a long time. Like my
mm,
grandfather had, you know, used oxen for a while to pull stuff. I mean, my mom is not old, but
Oh,
they just had like a very, yeah, slow, different way of life for a really long time.
yeah.
She, um, yeah, she was born in 1960 and they had an outhouse until she was 13. It's
Oh,
just like
wow.
things like that where you're like, she
Yeah.
remembers the first TV in the neighborhood, the first person who got electricity, It's
Oh,
just really fascinating.
wow, that's fascinating. I
Yeah.
had some questions about being raised in a bilingual home.
Mhm.
My mom grew up in South America. Her both her parents were American, but he was a cultural attaché, her father,
Mhm.
and so they would like help facilitate founding libraries down in different countries down there. They help facilitate arts exchange program like the Boston Symphony and the Brazilian Symphony
Oh,
would go to each other's places,
that's so
and
cool.
he would administrate. He didn't do any diplomatic stuff, but he facilitated arts and um, library stuff and things of that nature.
Mhm.
Um, and so she had a very interesting childhood growing up herself.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm kind of curious to hear what the European perspective is on that. Um, was like you, uh, I'm assuming you're fluent in French, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
That's pretty cool. I haven't.
It's great.
So, she's fluent in Spanish, but more South American Spanish,
Mhm.
and different countries down in South America have very different words for, like, house, and
Yeah.
you do not say the wrong word for house in the wrong country because it
Right.
means something totally like wedding stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you don't wanna make thing. So, but does France have, like, different dialects?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And do they have, like do they have the similar kinda thing where a word can mean different things in different parts of the country, or
It's not that extreme. I
okay.
would say not necessarily dialects, but accents. So
Oh,
there
okay.
are accents that are quite different, and then sometimes specific words are dead giveaways for where you're from.
Ah.
So, you know, one that everyone will recognize is pain au chocolat, which is like the croissant with chocolate in the middle.
Oh.
So my mom's from the south of France. I didn't even know this until I was maybe 12 or 13, but I have a very heavy Southern French accent.
Oh, cool.
Yes, I did not know that until I was 12 or 13, and a French person was speaking with my mom, and then she was like, "Wow, Emily's accent is really crazy," and I was like, "What is she talking about? I don't have an accent."
Oh, yeah. We don't have anything. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but she meant my French accent is
Aw.
very Southern, so I sound like a Southern French hick in
Aw.
France. Which is fine, but in the South, we would call a pain au chocolat a chocolatine. So to me, a
Oh.
chocolatine is what it is, but in the North, with the correct accent, it's like pain au chocolat, So things like
Oh.
that are a little different. Some,
Oh.
in France for greetings, you have the cheek, la bise, the kisses that you do. Um,
Ah.
depending on where you are or where you're from, you can do anywhere from 2 kisses to 3 or 4, which is
Oh.
wild. So anytime you greet and yeah, I think one of the big yeah, there are so many cultural differences, but being polite is very important.
Mm.
So whenever you arrive somewhere, you literally, like, just go down the line of people to faire la bise, to say hi. And then when you
Oh.
leave, again, you'd, like, go all around, get every person before you leave.
Oh,
So
interesting.
yeah, yeah, there are a lot of really
They're very casual
cultural
here in the
differences.
United States.
Yeah,
It's like,
but
you
then
just kinda
hugging,
say
for
bye and you
example,
go,
for them,
depending on
hugging is, like, really intimate,
I'm
right? And
sorry?
where the US, you hug, but, like,
Yeah.
touching a stranger's cheek with your cheek is not as intimate somehow. I don't know,
I don't know.
everything's different.
Yeah.
Everything's relative. It's just
I
what
have
you're
a
used to.
I have a different question for you. This
Mhm.
might be the cliche everybody asks this question, so
Okay.
I apologize. It's just, like, I don't know. Because I also forget to ask my mom this question. But do you think in English, or do you think in France, or is it kinda melded together in your mind?
Um, I think in English, but
Okay.
then when I'm there, I can think in French or I'll dream in French sometimes. It kinda depends. There are definitely some words or concepts that are clearer in one language or the other. So
Oh,
sometimes I'm like, man, there's this French word that captures what I want to say, but there isn't one in English or vice versa.
oh,
But I mean, I've grown up here, so I'm much more at ease in English than I am in French. But then, if I'm with my family for a bit after a few days, you kind of get into it more easily, and then
mm,
I can think in French too.
oh,
But
cool.
yeah, the
Has
brain is a crazy thing too, you know?
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Um, so you kind of mentioned a couple things of like different cultural differences, like the kissing on the cheek, or is it touching the cheek, or just
Yeah, you
kissing
do cheek to cheek, like
cheek to
the
cheek?
yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Um, and the different things like that. But have you noticed, as a communicator yourself,
Mhm.
have you noticed there interesting dynamics of like how the language forms the worldview
Hmm.
from a French and English perspective? What some of the differences are? Have you thought about that?
I
That's kind of
have
an esoteric question. I apologize. I'm just
No, no, totally fine.
curious.
I have thought of that. I know that's a pretty popular idea in linguistics, especially when people think about, "Oh, this might shape the way you think." Um, I don't know that's actually true as far as a language is concerned. I think it's more the environment. Like, my pastor uses a great phrase of, like, the sociology of your life. So where
Mm,
you are in your life, the people you're around, the cultural practices you're around, I think might shape a worldview more than the language itself.
mm,
Um, I know people like to think of, in French, the articles are gendered, right? So, like, la chemise, la porte, le la. Um, it's just such a natural thing that I don't think, someone once said, like, "Oh, but if you look at a bridge, you'll think of it in feminine terms because of the article in front of it." And I'm like, "I don't that hasn't been my experience. I don't think
uh,
that that's
okay.
it's just a way to say, like, a bridge, Um,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, but, yeah, I think it's more about, yeah, I would say cultural, uh, uh, what the culture does around you that more informs.
I have another little curious question because my dad was a voiceover talent, and he was one of his students was a very talented um, lady who knew Spanish and the different forms of Spanish. She understood like Mexican Spanish to South American Spanish, and she had translators to different countries, and she that was her business, is facilitating um, voice translations
Mm,
authentically from for businesses and whatever. And one of the things my dad actually had to do was direct somebody in another language in one project where he understood nothing. He and I are very much like we only understand English. to our to our chagrin, with I'm like I have enough trouble with English. I don't think I can master another language. Maybe someday, but so he would ask like directing questions like, well, this section right here, is that, are you saying this?" Because he had translation in English of what they were saying, and they said, "Yeah," and so he said, "Okay, I'd like you to kind of do that. Would that artistically, does that make sense in your culture, in that culture?" It's like, "Yes, okay, all right," and then do that, and then one of the things that he kind of had a little bit of a pet peeve of is that, as far as I knew, many or none, I don't know, of different languages did not create words like we do in English.
hmm,
Like, um, like okay, that was not a real word. That came about. Fun trivia for the listeners. I read about this. It was a candidate back in early 1900s or late 1800s or something like that. I can't remember exactly when. You can look it up on Wikipedia. But basically, his name was similar to OK, and so the slogan came about as such and such, whatever the named person, okay, and then that became meaning all right, or like okay, fine, it
Mhm,
had like 3 or 4 different meanings, and it was a new word created.
mhm.
Does French have that? Do they kind of create new meanings for of things
Hmm.
or
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I guess there's always the idea of slang, right? Because I think
right?
slang is maybe
Yeah,
a way that that happens.
yeah.
Um, I think what happens a lot in French is a lot of English words are appropriated. So, for example, weekend is a word in French and it means weekend, but it's just
Oh,
because, it's an American influence.
oh,
And there are plenty of those around, and because the French are who they are, they have a French academy who basically they're like the officials who decide what is officially French and what isn't. And they are
oh,
like this, they like guard the dictionary, which is great. I mean, I think
yeah,
that's really
yeah.
cool and
Just
nice.
yeah. I mean, they have a rich depth to history that we as Americans do not have. We only have like
Yeah.
200 plus years.
Yeah.
So it's like we're kind of babies in the world just making a mess of stuff.
Yeah. But,
It's like we
yeah.
make movies. That's our top export. It's
Yeah.
like,
We all have a lot of great things to add for
yeah,
sure. But,
yeah.
if I can make a case for French, I would just say, 35% of English words come from French. So that's the
Ah,
highest of all. I know everyone thinks English is Germanic, and it is, but it's also more French. So
that's
there you
interesting.
go. Take
That's
take
nice.
French.
I love this kind of stuff. We can just like learn interesting new things.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, I'm at 46 minutes, and I don't want to keep you too long.
Okay.
Um, but I'm flexible on time. How are you doing on time?
I'm flexible too. Yeah.
Okay. So, I thought maybe we'd pivot and go an
Mhm.
interesting direction, unless there's anything more that you'd like to talk about, language kind of stuff.
We could talk about that forever, so
Yeah.
we may
Maybe
as
we,
well
yeah.
transition.
Actually, I'd love to talk about your media background as well someday,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
maybe we could have you back on to talk about media and
Sure.
language and all that kind of fun stuff. Can
Yeah.
kind of geek out about media stuff
Yeah.
because I don't get enough people to talk about that with. Um, I mean,
I mean, I'm all about print media. I don't know how
yeah,
much,
and and you have some like filmmaking background and whatnot in school and stuff like
Yeah.
that, but you're a very multifaceted person, which I'm really loving about you. um, I thought maybe we could go to talk about like what what virtues or ideals or um, um, you know I'm not gonna get into the politics because 'cause I'm sure we probably agree on some stuff and disagree on other stuff, and that stuff doesn't interest me as much. I mean, we
Also,
so
they're
you can
not
have
the
interesting
solution.
conversations, but,
Yeah.
it's like, the whole business and meaning thing is about having good faith conversation with people you disagree with,
Right.
um, and just actually being curious about why they believe what they believe.
Yeah.
So that's the good thing.
Yeah.
But, you know, um I was just curious, like, what do you admire? What do you esteem? Whether it be virtues or character traits or, you know, like Superman or something. It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be a virtue itself. It could be like an ideal
Mhm.
or something like that. I'm trying to keep it like very open where you can go anywhere you want to go with it. If you need more specific, I can be more specific, but I'm just
No,
like,
that's
yeah.
that's great.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, something that I've been meditating on for a few years, and my friend Rachel and I talk about this a lot as well, being in the arts especially, is the idea of beauty. I think, beauty I in our world these days is kind of an ugly thing. It's been kind of stripped of any sort of transcendence and is basically viewed as a very utilitarian thing. So, even in art, there's, the anti-aesthetic movement and all these things where people intentionally turned away from beauty and cast out, like, did not want to make things that were beautiful and did it on purpose. And, there's a place for that kind of thing, to be sure. But I think we have lost a sense of beauty to our detriment because there's a deeper power behind beauty. So, first of all, I guess I could try and just define what I mean. I don't mean like physical beauty, but just in general, the concept of beauty um, is something that one beholds, I think. So it's actually not useful in any way, true beauty. And so because it doesn't have a use, it's something that can offer us moments of transcendence, or something that can point us to something outside of ourselves, right?
Mm,
So, the idea of humility, not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less, right? Self-forgetfulness.
mm,
Beauty definitely kind of breaks into our, you know, humdrum every day, like whatever the mental thing is, or if you're doing your daily routine or walking wherever you're walking, getting from point A to point B, the beauty is something that can interrupt that and kind of shake you out and almost kind of wake you up to reality. Even though we all live in reality, we are aware that it's around us. There's sometimes when you give space to observe beauty, anything from, right now it's springtime. So here in New York, everything's starting to bloom. So whether it's like seeing the crocuses in the yard or a rose, anything from that to, you know, a beautiful detail on a building in Times Square. We're like, wow, there's this great Art Deco building covered in screens, but right over here you can see the Art Deco thing, right? And I don't want to look at the screens. I want to look at that. Um, so it kind of like wakes you up to what's around you, and it's so refreshing. And so, yeah, I think beauty is an ideal that maybe we've lost to our detriment.
that's it. I did not expect that, and I should have foresaw that. You're a graphic artist. Like, uh, um, that's a really great point. I remember years ago, I was a public um media uh, uh public relations for an organization called the Faith Libraries of Northern Colorado, and they did seminars and events, and there was like it was a loose organization between like 6 or 7 different church libraries, and one of them was on the importance of beauty. I don't remember much of it right now. It was years ago, but I I I tend to be more utilitarian, um, and pragmatic in things. Like, I was never really into gardening. I was never really into what I call the frou-frou, scents and stuff like that. My sister-in-law, we all live together. My brother, my mom, and my sister-in-law and I, and she loves scented candles and nice scents and, flowers and stuff like that. And I'm like, my what kind of woke me up to beauty was actually essential oils.
Mm,
Was, because I got into it more from the health stuff because we all have health issues and stuff like that. So it's like if it didn't smell good, it was like it medicine. It's not technically medicine, but it's like what you could use it to help, like cold pill kind of thing.
mhm,
And but my mom just she grew up in she went to college in California, and near the campus or on the campus there was these orange trees. And so
mhm,
when she would walk to different buildings and stuff, she would have to go through the orange trees, which were in bloom, and it was beautiful scent.
mhm.
And so she really loved the citrus essential oils because that brought back nice memories for her.
Yeah.
And it's kind of an uplifting oil. From a pragmatic, it helps with anxiety and it helps with uplifting your mood and stuff like that.
Mhm,
And so it's like for me, learning about beauty was ironically through essential oils,
mhm,
which I've like, you know, I don't know why, but that's just how it happened for me in life. And I have some friends who like the nice smelling oils better. And so whenever I get something nice, it's a new oil from the company that we deal with. Um, I'll bring it to my geek family, when we get together on Fridays and let them smell it.
Nice.
But um, the like perfume,
Yeah.
uh, and I have this wonderful, beautiful picture that I got for a birthday. That's a moon over like a sea or a river or something with flowers in a night sky, and
Mm,
it's just gorgeous. And it just it 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 turns my room into four walls and a cell into my space.
mhm.
And it's just really, I'm looking at it over my computer right now, and it's just like it's big. It's like bigger than the screen, and
Nice.
you know, but but it's that's the power of art, is to kind of lift us up out of the mundane,
Mhm,
and to remind us that there's more than just you know the necessity of the life. We need something higher to reach for, an ideal, or something to like it's like food or water for the soul or something.
mhm.
So
Yeah.
I'm pontificating. I'll stop.
No, no, you're totally right. I mean, no, that's
Yeah,
totally right. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I guess recently, yeah,
I'm
I'd
gonna
started.
blow my nose. I'm gonna put the camera off for just a minute because I blew
Go
my
for
nose
it.
on somebody else's interview, and I'm not gonna make that mistake. I am listening to every word you say, though.
Okay. No problem.
Okay.
Yeah, I had gotten a new job and had a new commute and everything, and was probably about 5 months in when, I found myself one day I was stopped at a light and had to wait for cars to pass. And again, my commute is, like, on the fringe of Times Square, which anyone who lives in the city is like, "I don't wanna go to Times Square if I can avoid it." There's, like, a lot of people, and then for me, there's so many screens around, it's, like, really overwhelming.
Mm.
But anyway, one day I stopped and was just kind of looking up and just noticed that the light from the sun on the building, it was just a really nice quality of light. I was like,
Mm.
wow, the light is, this is just a really beautiful morning. And then as I was looking, I noticed that this building facade was all Art Deco. And I love Art Nouveau, Art Deco, um,
Mm.
that era. And it's almost like I saw the building for the first time, even though I'd been walking by it for 5 months, like, I had gone into the CVS downstairs, you know?
Oh,
But it kinda just, like, woke me up to what was right in front of me, and then during lunchtime walks, I started just noticing more details on other buildings in the neighborhood. A lot of the neighborhood there, I guess, was built around the same time, maybe during the, like, futuristic or Art Deco era, so there was a lot of a lot more ornamentation on buildings,
yeah.
than now, which is so great to see 'cause, now a lot of buildings are just like a block.
Yeah.
But the ornamentation really adds something lovely to a building where you can see, oh, like someone decided to do a brick pattern on up the side and then change the pattern at different points for, you can see the intentionality behind it. And it just made for a really great experience walking around and being refreshed by what was already there. And that I had it there all along, but didn't notice.
Cool. Well, we're getting up on. We've got 1 minute to go before I go over an hour, and I need to save some time on this StreamYard for my next interview.
Okay.
Um, but do you have any closing thoughts
Hmm.
of like art, or your enjoyment of working with hands-on artwork versus digital artwork on the computer, or
Mm.
anything else that you thought, or anything on a project? Um,
Oh, yeah, we didn't even get to talk about the project yet.
I know. It's like, so, uh,
The project's great.
yeah,
Everyone should everyone should check it out.
yeah.
Um, Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something great about working with your hands. I love the digital stuff, but I will say the things that I work on now all will be printed, which first of all, I'm grateful. That's really rare now in the design world to have a job that's purely print design.
Mhm.
So that's mine. I'm very lucky. I work at a magazine, and literally everything I do will be printed in the magazine, which is
Right.
great. So much stuff is social, digital, website.
Mm.
Um, but that being said, for sure, working with my hands is like such a different experience and um, something that's rewarding in a different way, because you kind of get caught up in the flow more, right? Where you're doing something, you react to it, something happens, you're like, "Oh, that's interesting." You react to that. Um, so I guess maybe I could end with the thought of, like, just follow your curiosity. I think a lot of times in creative discipline, we've just put a lot of pressure on ourselves, especially if I came from, like, the master's mindset where you have to have a reason for everything and it has to be thought out and you have to know what you're doing and be able to talk about it in front of people. It's not usually how art making works.
Yeah.
Most of the time you don't know what you're doing, you're just reacting. You're like, I did that because I wanted to,
Yeah.
or I thought it needed it. And so something that's been helpful for me, you know, now I'm 10 years out of my MFA, um, has been to just follow your curiosity because that is where your interest is.
Mhm.
Um, and wherever you're interested, whatever comes out of that is going to be so much better than anything else. So,
That really hits home because that's what I tell my tagline is I tell everybody from my bio is I just I follow the rabbit trails of my curiosity of where my learning and everything I
yeah.
do. And so I'm like, "Oh, I love you."
Yeah. I think we're just friends now, Valerie. That
Oh,
just, it's done.
okay. Cool. Yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show, and I'd love to have you back on again, per your
Sure.
schedule. We'll figure out a day and time, and we'll talk more in depth on many different things, including talking about the project as well,
Yeah.
your experience working on the project, and
Mhm.
also just like there's a whole topic of like I wanted to talk more about um, your own artwork and Art Deco and what attracted you to Art
Mhm.
Deco and
Mhm.
things like that. So I this is about an hour long. It's probably you know long enough. Paul can go longer. He's got
Yeah.
the audience to support it. I don't.
Yeah. He
But
and Joe Rogan, they can just go as long as they
yeah,
want.
they can go as long as they want. Um, but thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate
Thanks
it,
for
Emily.
having me. It's been
You're
great.
welcome.
Thank you.
So, feel free to check out writersofmeaning.com to see how you can help support this lady's wonderful work on our project. And also in the show description down below, I will have her website so you can go and check out her artwork, both in print and also she does cards and things and the print, working on design work for books and stuff like artists, thankfully. Um, and so thank you for listening and watching, and we'll see you next time on Writer the Meaning.